My friends, I want to talk to you today very simply about government.
All right, folks, welcome back to another home team episode of Diplomatic Immunity. And as always, I'm your co-host, Kelly McFarland, and joined today by Tristen Naylor, as we do on these episodes. And Tristen is coming to us from the great, well, I was going to say 51st state, but I'll leave that alone.
John,
The great region up north, our friendly neighbors to the north. The Canadian is back in Canada. And
so
we've got
happy
a
to be
lovely
home.
view of Vancouver behind you.
Yeah,
there.
I'm in Victoria,
Okay.
and just at the inner harbor, one of my favorite places on Earth. The sun is out, the seaplanes are flying overhead. It is stunning, and I'm really happy to be home.
Well, it looks lovely. So we've got a busy show today. Only two topics, but a lot going on, and very well. Our second topic very well could be, overtaken by events by the time we're done recording this, let alone by the time it gets released. But today we're going to talk about another shakeup in British politics, hot off the presses. And then again, hot off the presses, what is going on with Iran and the U.S. in their nuclear negotiations or their ceasefire negotiations, whatever you want to call these. So we're going to look at both of those. But so I know you're in Canada. Sister just got married. Congrats to the Naylor extended family. And how's everything else? Enjoying your time back in your homeland?
Absolutely. I just got here a little less than a week ago. The worst of the jet lag is over, which is nice. And obviously the sunshine helps, and the excitement around my sister's wedding has kept the adrenaline where it ought to be. But yeah, everything's really, really well. Of course, our executive program that we run in the summer in Oxford this year is gearing up. We're there in a month's time, so it's busy with that. But all very, very good. And I get to be outside and it not be like 100% humidity, which is decidedly not the Hong Kong that I left.
That is a bonus, that's for sure.
And how about you?
It's good. It's good. Busy. The kids are out of school. Had their last day last week, and they were actually here at Georgetown with me today in the office. They're sitting in the conference room. I knew that Fire Stick that I put into the back of our big conference television would come in handy at some point, and they're watching some TV and eating lunch. So all good. I'm off to the annual Schaefer conference tomorrow at the Ohio State University. So I'm going back to Ohio tomorrow to go to the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations, my people. So that conference will be at the end of the week. And the whole fam's going back, going to visit my dad, get some grandpa daycare while my wife and I go down to Columbus for the conference. And U.S. soccer. Who'd have thunk? They look pretty darn good, Tristen. And Canada has won a game. And drawn,
and I mean against Qatar, that was a thumping. It was great.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
all due respect to our
yes, but
in Qatar.
Yeah, but both of our squads are looking pretty good. So this is the most, the most hype I can remember around a U.S. team. And I got to say, watching the first game especially, that's the best, hands down, that I've ever seen a U.S. soccer team look on the field. So expectations are growing by the minute here in the United States. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, they've already won their group. So in the third game, who knows? I'm assuming we'll see some different players, getting some other guys some experience on the field, and doesn't matter if we win or lose. So that might tamp down a little bit of the expectations for people who aren't following it that closely and don't realize that the game doesn't matter on Thursday. So, but we'll see. It should be exciting. And if nothing else, it's a good run for them, even if they lose in the first game of the knockout stage. I mean, they've already been setting records and all that kind of stuff. So fun times. But to get to the serious side, not that the World Cup's not serious. I'm going to get some hate mail for that one. But we're going to lead off today with the resignation of Keir Starmer. So this has been called for a while now. The Labour Party, after winning a massive landslide about 2 years ago, has been going downhill, and people have been blaming Starmer for this. And, Britain's been stuck in a malaise for a number of years now. We know that they've had multiple prime ministers in the past decade, and they did come into power with high expectations, and the Labour Party sort of turned things around and took power back from the Conservatives. And the growth and productivity in the country has remained stagnant, though. Taxes have been going up, but people aren't necessarily seeing any improvements for services or things like that, because they need to pay more for the government pensions and the old age pensions and things like that. There were plans to increase defense spending, but they're struggling to find the money to do that, while also having to cut essential services that people are very much tied to. Other parties are doing better. Reform is doing better, and Starmer kind of made enemies of everyone. And he's been doing a lot of things that, just sort of ticked people off, with fuel cuts, immigration crackdowns. He nationalized the railroad, but didn't go far enough for those on the left. And then we had the drama around his pick for ambassador to the United States and his ties to Epstein. So, a lot's been going on, and they've been calling for him to step down for a while now. But Tristen, I'm going to toss this over to you, because you've lived and breathed British politics for a while, having lived there and following this stuff a little bit more closely. Like I said, they've been calling for him to step down for months now, and he hasn't. And all of a sudden he comes out this morning and says that he is resigning. So why now? What does this set up moving forward? I know he's resigning, but he's not resigning, right? He's still in power until the party picks a new leader, which is going to take a little bit of time. Who we're hearing all this stuff about Burnham. Who is he, and where's he coming from through all this?
All right. Goodness, I'm on the west coast of Canada right now, so I've only just woken up to this news, and so I've been digesting it.
We always get you first thing in the morning, regardless of where you are.
Yeah, always prepared, but a little less so today. Look, over the course of the weekend, we heard increasing chatter that, in fact, he was going to go, and indeed he has announced that he will go. The ability, it seems, to hold on to the premiership in the UK is near impossible right now. In my reading, we are still downwind of Brexit, and this is yet another premiership taken down by Brexit. You mentioned economic stagnation, and it is very obvious what the leading cause of that is. General unhappiness with, believe it or not, the relationship with the EU, where 10 years on from the vote, the realities of how difficult, even look, it's summer now, and a lot of British holidaymakers want to be over in Europe and are facing massive queues once again now, with a new system installed at the borders, which is just slowing everything down. It is exactly what we've been talking about before Brexit. We've been saying is the inevitable result of this, and I just use that as an illustration of sort of popular sentiment building up on lots of little things where it's the government to blame. There's this idea that in sweeping to power 2 years ago, Starmer had a magic wand and could reverse these massive structural difficulties that in some ways Britain has self-imposed on itself, and he can't. Nobody can. I do feel, though, that one of what's really brought us here, we could talk about all the different issues, and maybe we should, but there's no single one that has killed him politically. I think one of his greatest failings is his ability to communicate. He is not He's
Right.
not a great communicator. He's not a Tony Blair. And there is no prime minister. Nobody in that office is able to steer, certainly at the speed that seems to be demanded, Britain into a better place. But what a different prime minister, indeed maybe what Andy Burnham, and I'll come to him in just a second, might be able to do is articulate in a compelling way the vision for what's next for Britain, rather than just repeating the line that has been coming out of the government. It's like, yes, look, times are tough, but we're doing our best. And that's undoubtedly true. But the art of leadership is being able to tell in a positive way where you're headed. And in my reading, that's where Starmer has just abjectly failed. Now, to pivot to Andy Burnham, who is heralded as the very likely successor to Keir Starmer. He formerly was in national politics, then went up to Manchester and has been the mayor of the Greater Manchester region. He is wildly popular up there, known as the King in the North. He ran in a by-election in a constituency called Makerfield. This is a Brexit-loving area. It is very Reform and Nigel Farage heavy, and yet Burnham won, and he won handily. And this is remarkable for a number of reasons, but one of them is that he's proven that he can he's electable in exactly the area that Labour is worried about. Sort of the rush that Reform is making to being a major force in the Commons, if not the chief rival to Labour in the next election. So this is big. It does, one question that I have this morning, which will be resolved in the days to come, is whether or not somebody else in the party will challenge Andy Burnham for the leadership of the party, and by extension, then the premiership of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. What I was reading just before we began recording was, no, it looks like he's going to have a clear run at it. There won't be opposition. It's not my place to say what I hope happens, but one thing that is worth remembering is that there seems to be a sentiment about where the idea of just crowning somebody to lead is not rewarded, and in fact is punished. And Kamala Harris being the prime example of that. So we'll see if somebody challenges it. I think it would be advantageous to do so. But look, British politics is crazy and has been crazy for over a decade now. So we'll see. We'll see.
And so you mentioned that he won handily in this area that was sort of not necessarily a Labour stronghold. What makes him different? Is he just more dynamic? And is he good with getting his message across? I mean, it doesn't seem like it was just, we're going to vote for the Labour guy, because it's not necessarily the area that does that. So what makes him different from Starmer per se?
So he has quite a lot of cross-party appeal. Remember, he's spent the past years as a mayor.
Right.
And the type of politicking that one gets to do is decidedly different from a prime minister. You are closer to your constituents, and the kinds of problems you're solving are the kinds of things that people see.
You either fix the potholes or you don't.
You fix exactly. And so that is a huge advantage. The narrative, or one of the leading narratives against the current Labour government and against Sir Keir Starmer, is they don't do anything. They don't get anything done. Whereas, a fundamentally different arena of politics is city politics or regional politics, where you're able to fix the potholes. You're able to say, yeah, look, demonstrably travel times have decreased, and you are seen to be doing things. Also, he's newly arrived as of today after this by-election in the Commons. So he also gets to play a bit of an outsider card. He's got the ability to say, like, that's a Keir Starmer policy.
Yeah.
That wasn't done on my watch. I have nothing to do with that. Tricky game to play when you don't have, you haven't contested an election.
Right.
And another question that should be on our minds now is, will he call a snap election to get a new mandate for his party or not? Risky move, it's
Right.
something that
Always.
Theresa May did when she was in office. Went very, very badly for her. It's something that Boris Johnson did, and it went very, very well for him. And it's a real political gamble as to whether or not it'll go one way or another, and it really is based on so much just on sentiment.
Right. Yeah. It's the one thing that strikes me that you noted was the ungovernable nature of Britain right now and just politics in Britain. And I feel like that's not. I mean, obviously, Britain has been a poster child for that over the past decade, but I feel like that's a growing issue all over the place, and I think it's partly because of the nature of elections and politicking today and social media, that expectations are just so high for every new person coming in. And it's, you don't have a year or 2, 3, 4 anymore to get things done. It has to be almost immediate. And I think we're seeing this just all over the place with like going back and forth between parties in America. You see a Trump coming in with, this sort of outsider populist viewpoint. Things don't go well. People immediately flip back to the Democrats. We have inflation and things like that. And, issues with who's running, who's not running, that kind of stuff. And then they flip back again. And I think we're seeing this in, right-wing candidates winning in Latin America, different countries having just, multiple prime ministers and presidents in short number of years. And I think it's a lot of different factors are making a lot of places ungovernable in many ways. But Britain definitely is sort of at the, unfortunately for Britain, one of the top in that pyramid for sure. But we'll see we'll see what happens over the next few months. And yeah, I mean, I think the key things to watch, as you note, are will anybody else step up to challenge Burnham? And then will he call snap elections? Do they feel like they've got some momentum with a new face? And do they want to step out before somebody like Reform can gain more traction? Just, a lot of things to watch for as we move forward. But
absolutely.
All right. Moving on to another intractable problem. But since we spoke last, the United States and Iran have signed a ceasefire agreement and have begun negotiations over the weekend with Vice President Vance flying to Europe to talk to Iranian negotiators through Pakistani mediators about trying to get some sort of longer term deal done. And the deal that was signed, opened the Straits of Hormuz. And there was announcements of the U.S. Eventually giving sanctions relief, which, as of this morning, the U.S. Department of Treasury has issued sanctions waivers for Iranian oil. So the Iranians are already seeing something from this. The key question remains, though, is what's going to happen with the nuclear profile? What sort of agreement is Iran going to sign, if any, on curtailing their program, ending their program, guarantees of non-proliferation? What are they going to do moving forward? And we haven't seen anything on that angle of this yet. And I think it's, when I think about this and I think about, because there's all kinds of rhetoric out there. Obviously, the administration is trying to spin this as a huge victory and a win for the United States. The Iranians obviously are spinning it as a victory for them, as they will. Both sides are pushing out the propaganda and the spinning this the way they want to spin it. You've got pushback here in the United States from the Democrats and from some more hawkish Republicans. on this deal, but I think it's important, and I want to get your take on this, but it's important to step back and think of where we were in January and what has changed when you look at the strategic goals, the numerous strategic goals that the administration put out there justifying the war in Iran, right? You've got regime change. You've got no nuclear weapon or no nuclear capability. You've got their missile capabilities and ending that. You've got the funding to the proxy groups and ending that. So the war happens. We did take out a large number of the regime in attacks. We took out a large percentage of their missile capability. We've made it harder for them to fund and aid their proxy groups just because of, they've got their hands full. Sanctions were doing a fair bit of that already by like cutting their funding and things like that. So they had a harder time getting money to these groups. And the Straits of Hormuz were open and there was no blockade or mining or anything like that. So, we're now in a situation where we're hailing the fact as a victory that the strait is open, which we caused it being shut by attacking Iran. So that's no different than before the war started. They still do have a missile capability. It's degraded, but there's nothing stopping them from rebuilding that and continuing that process. They're still aiding proxy groups, and they are still controlling their nuclear materials and haven't done anything on that side of the portfolio. So I'm not really sure what has changed yet, or if anything is going to change after, months of war and back and forth throughout a so-called ceasefire that saw all kinds of, lobbing missiles here and there from both sides. And, the biggest wild card in this still remains Israel, who is supposed to be, Israel and Hezbollah are supposed to be adhering to this ceasefire as well. But we have seen ongoing fighting in Lebanon from both sides. So a lot of things to shake out. Obviously, this is very early days of this. This just happened today and yesterday. And we'll see what happens. And they said they want to get a nuclear deal done in 60 days, which, color me skeptical on that one. The JCPOA took 18 months. So these are extremely technical, detailed issues, especially if you're going to let Iran maintain some sort of nuclear domestic capability. You have to get very detailed on the numbers and the amounts and what gets done and where it's stored, all these different things, allowing inspectors in, all these different sorts of things. So, and at the end of the day, obviously everyone is going to see what comes of this and they're going to put it into, Chat GPT next to the JCPOA and say, what are the differences and similarities here? Which one is better and more strict on Iran? Again, there's a lot more to be done over this, with this throughout the next few weeks and months. But what's your initial take on what's been going on?
Goodness. Well, what has changed? Iran's strategic negotiating position has been strengthened significantly. The idea of closing the Strait of Hormuz, and would that have the effect that was envisaged? Well, it was always theory before, and now we know indeed
Right.
it does. This is a spectacular way of ensuring your security and increasing the cost of action on others. One of the things that really strikes me, and I did want to ask you about this, but for lots at you, and then you could pick up what you choose, is that the timing of this deal. It did seem to me, we've been saying this for weeks, that Trump wants out. He wants to get away from this.
Mhm.
It was always, it seems in his mind, envisaged as a Venezuela, 2.0. It's going to be a weekend of things blowing
Right.
up, and then I get to, declare my greatness and my victory and America's greatness on Monday morning. In the signing, and one of the things that is getting at me is in the media, they keep saying, they've reached an agreement. They've reached an agreement. We've got another MOU that
Right.
is the outlines of the things that need to be agreed
Right.
upon.
Need to be discussed and
Yeah.
negotiated.
Yeah. And so, once again, we have the American president and the administration saying, like, look, aren't we great at what we do? This is the greatest deal maker in the world. And yet, we're talking about yet another MOU. We're talking about an agreement that does involve a ceasefire, one that doesn't seem, it seems to be exactly as tenuous as the last one.
Right.
Exactly as you pointed out, Israel and Hezbollah are meant to be abiding by this ceasefire as well. They're not. And again, another question that I have for you, because this is far more your wheelhouse than mine. It seems to me that Netanyahu has very little incentive to abide by this ceasefire. I can't imagine what that incentive would be. And, if we're looking for actors to play a spoiler role, and there's no shortage of them, it seems to me that Netanyahu and his political survival is definitely someone we ought to be casting an eye towards. There's even the some of the details of this agreement, which again, I don't know. I've got sort of surprise fatigue at this point in the second Trump administration. But like the $300 billion reconstruction fund for Iran, which seems awfully like the sort of thing that he once criticized previous administrations and particularly Barack Obama for having such a fund. Where is that coming from? How does that fit with his prior position? And again, I recognize that that's a question that's really just rhetorical. Of course, it doesn't fit with prior position, but there's just so much here that is so messy, is so flimsy, that again, progress in diplomacy is slow, but this isn't great diplomacy. I'm not seeing evidence of that yet. It seems to me, again, just quite slapdash and just, we need an agreement quickly. So let's bake something that kind of that we can sell as an agreement to our own domestic constituency.
No, I mean, I think that's spot on. I mean, this is, that we know that this is a president that doesn't have the sort of the capacity for these long-term negotiations and things like that. He wants quick agreements, things that he can sell to his constituency. Sorry. Just like
No, I
noted.
did that to you. I barely made it through. Yeah.
But he doesn't have the patience for the long haul in diplomatic negotiations. And, I think to your point, when they released during the JCPOA, when they released the $50 billion in frozen Iranian funds, I mean, the right and the Republican Party excoriated Obama and his administration so hard. And now we're seeing that they're already getting sanctions relief before we even sign any sort of nuclear agreement. And he's talking about this $300 billion reconstruction package, that maybe some of that will come from frozen Iranian funds, but they don't have $300 billion. And so you're talking about like getting money to rebuild an Iran that still has the regime that we were trying to overthrow. Like, how are you going to sell that? I mean, and again, this is all, we've heard before that billions are going to be raised for certain reconstruction projects and they don't come to fruition. And that's not just a Trump administration thing. I have to admit on that one, but it's, the sort of what once would have been called a horrible deal by this very president seems to be the things that he's signing up for now, just so he can sign something and move on. And that to me is where the square doesn't circle. And it's still, there's so much to be said. Like you said, this is basically just, it is an MOU and it's another ceasefire, but they're kind of treating it like it's a done deal, end stage kind of thing. And to your point, Israel is still the huge wild card in this, because so much of this, as you noted, is tied to Netanyahu's political lifeline. I mean, for over a decade now that he's been back in power on and off, the security against Iran has been his main selling point that he's talked about the most. That has been the thing that he has been known for. And, we saw what he did during the JCPOA. He came and gave a speech ranting against it to Congress when the U.S. was trying to get the deal done, and back in the Obama administration. And, you've got elections coming up in Israel, and he's not going to want to be seen as being part of what he views and what the right in Israel views as a bad deal, and is so far removed from what their goals were back in February. And I just don't see a world, especially as from all reports, the relationship between him and President Trump is not going so well. So he's not necessarily going to be beholden to the president in the way he might have been before. We've seen instances where he has sort of backed off at times due to Trump's demands or things like that. But when it's getting so close to sort of an end point, he may not worry about that as much anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that, he's going to do what he thinks needs to be done, whether or not the U.S. is on board with that. And that could really muddy the waters and make this more difficult, as long as that fighting in Lebanon is tied to all of this. And, there's so many moving parts in this, and it's not going to be settled tomorrow or this week. We may have some, major news things happening in the next few days, but again, things have been happening, but it's not like we can sit here and say like, oh, it's done and it's moving forward, and like this is, dot your I's, cross your T's, and this thing is all wrapped up nice and neat. This is just the next step moving forward in what's going to be a long, drawn out process. But obviously, it goes without saying, if we can get the fighting to end, that is a good thing. So let's hope the ceasefire holds, and then we can see what actually gets negotiated as far as, nuclear capabilities, missile capabilities, aid to proxies. Remember, these are all things that people complained about in 2015, because the JCPOA did not include those things, right? It didn't include funding to proxies or missile capabilities. It was seen as something that had to be included in any sort of deal that the Republicans did or the Trump administration did. It was a part of the war aim goals. And so we'll see what happens with that moving forward. But I'm not optimistic that there's going to be some sort of deal that, hands over all of Iran's nuclear capabilities, and they open the door to inspectors, and there's no missile capabilities, and they wash their hands of the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. I don't see that
universe in which that happens.
Yes.
Not
as far as long as the regime is in power. No. So, but anyways, all right, man.
There we go. We get to ending on an optimistic note as always.
Yes, as always. That's what we're here for, folks. But well, enjoy your time in Canada.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
Let's hope the World Cup. There's been some great games, and we've got a long time to go. So lots more football to watch. So I'm excited about that. And we may be on hiatus for a while here, folks. We don't know. We might get into a couple more episodes this summer, but we will see. TBD, as I like to say. But Tristen, good luck with the academy in Oxford next month, and I hope everything goes well. And enjoy your summer.
You too. All right.
All right, man. Take it easy.